Okay, let's take a look at self-publishing versus legacy publishing. And I'm going to actually talk about the disadvantages of each because, you can talk about the advantages, but I think there's more to learn from the disadvantages. I mean, in some ways, the advantages might be sort of we kind of already know them. Obviously, if some, well-known publisher picks you up, you're going to have the benefit of this big machine behind you, or so you think. And it legitimates you, I'm published with Harper and Row or whatever, it gives you some legitimacy and all that. But let's take a look at the disadvantages of it, because I am a self-publisher and I want to tell you how great self-publishing can be. So let's take a look at the disadvantages of legacy publishing. First of all, it takes 2 years from start to publish. That is, it'll take you about 6 months to try to find an agent, to get it even read. I mean, it's very much like Hollywood, which we already know it takes forever, right? 6 months to maybe, if you're lucky, to find an agent. Out of all the agents, get someone to actually read it and to get back to you. Then it takes about 6 months for them to get a publisher, to find a publisher out of their connections to get it read and get back to them. And then if you're lucky enough to have them interested, it'll take, even if the things, and by the way, you do have to have it completely written. Mostly, at least fictional, since we're talking about adapting screenplays, and it's mostly going to be fictional or, fictionalization. Mostly, especially if you're an unknown writer, if you're unknown, if you're unpublished, they're going to usually want to have the whole thing written. So even then, if they like it, it'll be a year later because they schedule like a year or two in advance. So it's a long process, and and that's actually, I experienced it myself, and that's another one of the reasons why I still consider trying to get a publisher with different novels. Should I try to get a publisher with this just to see what happens? And I give up because of some of these negatives. But of course, self-publishing, you can release it immediately. You write it and you can get it out there within a couple days if you want. Legacy publishing is mostly interested in blockbusters. Again, this is a lot like Hollywood. They're getting just like movie studios. If you're a celebrity, fine. I think it would be great to go with a legacy publisher because also they're going to put a lot of money into you, but they only put money into blockbusters and into huge celebrities. They don't do it for the mid-level writers and below, like the lower tiers of their writers. They don't put any money. They slap you on their lists of books that are being released, but they don't put any money into advertising or anything. And less so nowadays. And I experienced this as well when I interacted and found out what they would put behind me if they did take me on. In fact, I am a published author. I have a couple books that have been published by, and they're nonfiction though. It's about movies and worldviews and stuff like that. But I have the experience of being published, and this all fits with all that. I was a mid-level writer, just a good writer, no celebrity, but they put almost no money and no backing behind my book, and they focus more of their money on the celebrities. Thirdly, you have to do your own marketing anyway, and this has become more the case in later years. One of the first things a publisher will ask you, if they're interested in you, is precisely what is your audience? What is your platform? How many email subscribers do you have? Where are you going to go speak? Are you going to go on a tour speaking? They want to know what you're going to do to push your book because they're not going to do much. So you have to do, they're only going to invest their big dollars in the blockbusters. They're not going to really get behind you if you're a mid-level writer or below. And so you're really going to have to be doing most of your own marketing anyway. So a lot of it's still up to you. And that's the way it's becoming. I've heard this from even more successful writers as well. This isn't just, I'm not just making this up or I'm not complaining. This is the reality. And then also legacy royalties are about, of course it varies. Again, if you're a celebrity, you can get a lot more percentage. But again, first-time writers or what have you, 5 to 10% until you start making hundreds of thousands or millions. Self-publishing royalties are like 40 to 70%. 70% is the Kindle, and 40% would be like the audible books. So again, only the celebrities and stars get the bigger percentages. The advances for a new writer could, again, new writers could be anywhere from, like, depending on your publisher, if you got a big publisher, it'd be more, of course, but 3,000 to 10,000 maybe. Yeah, not much. You have to really prove yourself. Now, there are writers who, once they start selling more copies, they can get $50,000 advances and stuff like that. But again, these are people who've sold more. Here's the other interesting thing as well, is that because of the success of self-publishing, self-publishing writers are now breaking the New York. Sometimes the New York Times bestseller list has half of them are self-published, the top 10. There's been times when that's occurred. So they've been forcing the legacy publishers to really stop abusing writers. They have to make better deals, and they have been. They've been abusing writers, and this has been a good thing. So there are self-published authors who have actually commanded higher royalties than anyone else had gotten. Why? Because they're already getting 70% on Amazon. So how can you as a big publishing house offer me better than that? Well, we're going to give you all this backing and whatever, our pipeline and all this. Okay, but it's got to be a lot closer to that 70%, because otherwise I'll make as much money selling less on my own. I'll make more money because of the higher percentage. So a lot of it's a numbers game, but self-publishing has really helped the authors who are in the published world as well. But also, you do not control the IP, the intellectual property. And now publishers are savvy. They know all about movie rights. It didn't used to be that way 15, 20 years ago, right? But now, of course, they're going to want the movie rights and all that. So, because of course, when Hollywood comes calling, there's a lot of money in that, right? When you self-publish, you control it all. And then lastly, you become a slave to their marketing demands. What that means is, there are many stories I've heard of writers being forced to change their content to meet politically correct nonsense, and especially today with trigger warnings and all that kind of crap. And also just whatever is socio-politically important or not important, you have to play their games. And if you have something that you really, really think is important and it's edgy or it's pushing the envelope in that sense, in terms of content or whatever, you might be forced to change it. Also, just like the studios, you know how the studios have become run by the marketing division now, and that's why we have so many bad movies, because they're sapping that creativity. Same thing with big publishers. It's all about marketing. So that's going to rather than you write something and then they market it, the marketing actually determines a lot of what you write. Now, as I'm saying this, I'm not denying that we as writers should be aware of markets. I do think we should. It should affect us. But I think when it's dominated, when you're with a big publisher, you have to do what they say, basically. Self-publishing, you can take big risks or not. But you can take the risks and you experience the consequences, good or bad. But the point is you can take those risks, and many risks have been taken by self-publishers, like combination of genres that people say wouldn't work and they do, this kind of thing. So that's an exciting thing. But also, so we do need to be aware of marketing, have a market awareness. We do have to be aware of these things, and I think our writing should. If you want to make money as a writer, if you want to make a living, you've got to take that in consideration. But you don't want to be a slave, do you? And that's what happens with the legacy publishers. Now, let's take a quick look at the disadvantages of self-publishing, because look, that's what I'm here for, is to promote it, but I also want to be frank, and I also want to be realistic and not be delusional. There are some negative aspects of self-publishing. Number one, you have to do everything, and I mean everything. Again, though, remember what I said, though, in some ways nowadays, legacy publishing is not much different. You have to do a lot of it all yourself, too. So it's not all that different. But marketing today is all about social media platforms and getting an audience and interacting with your audience. No matter what you do, it's still up to you. They're going to demand that, if legacy publishers is going to demand that you do what you should be doing on your own anyway, which is, Twitter, Facebook, all that kind of stuff. Website, we'll talk about that later. Also, there's a big time commitment. It's basically my day job, full-time work, because and half of your time you spend writing, half of your time is marketing and developing how to sell, new ways to sell, because there's always new ideas and things are always changing. You got to keep up or you perish. So it takes a lot of time, but as you know, in Hollywood, you got to spend half your time marketing your script too. So it's not that different. Also, there is still you have to pay for everything. I forgot to mention that. You have to pay for everything because it's all up to you. But again, legacy publishers don't really pay for much anyway. If you're a new writer, they're not going to really put much behind you anyway. So, you have to still go out on your tours and speaking and do all that stuff. Over the 3.5 years, and I spent more in the beginning in marketing, but over 3.5 years, I spent about $30,000 in all, and that includes like website and any money I spent towards like developing the brand. That's about how much I've spent over 3.5 years. I would pay out of my profits at first, so that, and I still do, so that's helpful. It's not like I have to get a loan or anything like that. But nevertheless, it's, you got to spend some money. And then there is still the professional stigma against self-publishing. Won't deny that. But this is quickly being overcome because, again, many self-published novelists are just the tops. You can't even beat their sales. So they're laughing, So in some ways, in some ways, if you become a successful self-publisher, you could the stigma will be being published because you're the fool, because you're the one who's giving everything away. And the self-publishers have a lot of control. But the cool thing about it is, if you can't, and again, I'm not even against going and looking for a traditional publisher. There are advantages, and go ahead. But the great thing about it is, now if you can't get published, your novel doesn't have to sit there and languish on the shelf. You can self-publish. That's the whole point. Go ahead, try to get a publisher, and if you can't, then self-publish. And that's the exciting thing, because in the past, you put in all this work and it just sits there if you can't get it published. So at the end of the day, I think, at least for me, a writer prefers to be read. And to make a living off of that, and to have thousands of people reading my stories, right? I mean, that's what I want as a writer. Not being accepted by critics. Not being accepted by, I'm published with such big. I mean, I know people who have big publishers, and I may sell more on my books than they do. Their books might be in more of a niche market, but the point is I'm a writer and I want people to read my stories. And like many of you, we've already talked before, I have stories that I've invested my heart in sitting on my shelf that no one's reading. And that's the exciting opportunity. And I can't tell you guys, over these last 2.5 years, has been the most empowering time of my life as a writer. And I've been writing for many, many years, screenwriting. And it's been the most empowering. Why? Because I know thousands of people are reading my stories. So when I get rejected by I'm still writing scripts. When my script gets rejected and it's not getting made, I'm going, that's okay, because I know thousands of people are reading it. And that's another technique we'll talk about is, even if you want your screenplay to get sold, write it as a novel too and get that out. That's what Suzanne Collins did with Hunger Games, right? So it's a great way to do both. And even if it doesn't get made as a movie, thousands will still be reading it. That's important to me.